It's common knowledge among both the revolutionary left and the militant right that this country is simply not long for this earth. Why? For one, it was built on blood. Empires built on blood always die in blood. It happened to the Ottomans, it happened to the Romans, it happened to the British, and it will inevitably happen to the United States. Nothing lasts forever. Empires, especially. They rise, they have their brief moment in the sun, and then they collapse. The United States has only existed for 244 years. By imperial standards, that is the equivalent of a decade. Keep in mind that the Zhou dynasty in China lasted for 790 years. In the 244 years of its existence, the United States has sown discord and murder around the world, achieved technological dominance in major part through being excellent at producing capitalists who exploit and steal others' scientific research and inventions. Looking at you, Thomas Edison. It has survived the fall of the revisionist USSR, and it has enslaved tens of millions of African and other people. It has chained the nations of Hawaii and Puerto Rico to it, reducing both beautiful nations to military camps laden with debt and hunger. It has filled Latin America with toxic waste and toxic leaders. It has obstructed the desires of all humankind for peace, land, bread, and socialism through its very existence. It simply must go so that humanity can live. How will it go? First and foremost, let me start with the caveat that this is just speculation. It is a charlatan and a hack that claims that they can predict the future. However, we can look at the factors and contradictions at play along with our history and develop something that resembles a future analysis. This is what I will attempt to do. However, I can be wrong. Only the future knows what the future will hold. First of all, the left will not be the only show going. America is the most armed country in the history of humanity. This country has more guns than people. For every 100 people, there are 120 guns. During a breakdown of bourgeois law and order, this number will skyrocket as individuals and paramilitary factions break into police arsenals, military bases, gun stores, armories, and other places where large amounts of firearms and ammunition are kept, or those who work there steal them and distribute them to the factions with whom they are most politically aligned. Most of the guns in this country are held by people who cannot be considered even remotely left. Thankfully, with the proliferation of leftist gun clubs and oppressed nationality groups who organize on an armed basis for self-defense, this seems to be turning, but we are still outgunned. Mao Zedong taught that we should first analyze enemies and friends. To the revolutionary communists, enemies are those who, in a protracted civil war situation, will be shooting at us, and with good reason, because we are opposed to their class interests. Keep in mind that writing an article denouncing someone is radically different from an enemy-friend perspective, considering that wars change things, and in the course of a war where you're outgunned by reactionaries and fascists, you're probably going to be looking to link up, even tactically, with anybody who is semi-progressive and has a common enemy with yourself. We can consider enemies in a potential second civil war to be the settler police, the reactionary bourgeois factions/cliques within the U.S. military. Keep in mind, the U.S. military at this point may or may not have splintered among itself, probably on racial lines, the myriads of armed fascist groups and militias, and individual armed reactionaries who are concentrated overwhelmingly in the suburbs, exurbs, and rural areas. We could also possibly consider the leadership of lumpen street organizations to be opposed in many instances to communist activity, but the rank and file who, in many instances, join these groups because they were coerced may be friendly. The leadership, on the other hand, has millions of dollars at stake and naturally will not be friendly to communism. We also have seen historically the collaboration of the leadership of such groups with both left and right forces. In Latin America and the Philippines, drug cartels and lumpen organizations have, more often than not, worked hand in hand with right-wing governments which are ultimately controlled by Yankee imperialism. We have also seen, however, in China, how bandits join the ranks of the Red Army. Both Fanon and Huey P. Newton mentioned the importance of struggling with the lumpen proletariat, lest they be won over by the enemy. This remains of utmost importance. Communists will also have to face the private armies and mercenaries hired by Fortune 500 corporations or their remnants, and the upper bourgeoisie. These groups are not restricted by laws of war and engagement, as any Iraqi or Afghan civilian will tell you. Friends will include other leftists. Sectarianism and mindless polemicizing is a peacetime activity. Nitpicking each other over theoretical differences is something that simply won't happen in a wartime situation. I've already mentioned how the broader left will be outgunned. Quibbling over the finer points of Marxist theory during wartime is a perfect way to ensure that we all end up in a mass grave where we could quibble forever. If somebody is a Marxist, they are a friend and your comrade in arms. Friends also include progressive political elements, which ideally will be organized into a united front under communist leadership. Note that I said ideally. Friends will also include the advanced elements of workers and revolutionary organizations of colonized people. We could count working class and semi-proletarian colonized people as our friends. Now, keep in mind that dialectics teaches us that things can change at the drop of a hat. There will be tactical alliances that transform into antagonistic contradictions and may transform back into tactical alliances, such as war. Ask Mao. The Chinese Communist Party went from fighting the Kuomintang to uniting with them to throw the Japanese out to fighting them until they chased them off the mainland. Situations like this will be commonplace in the Second American Civil War. Let's talk about the terrain of the United States. This is a huge country, with Alaska being large enough to be its own country. The cities are where most of the action will be because most of these countries' people live in and around cities. New African anarchist comrades in places like Rockford have highlighted the importance of paying attention to smaller cities and towns. I think this is true, it holds merit. But we should keep in mind that all cities are surrounded by the overwhelmingly reactionary countryside, which is going to be the province of reactionary armed groups and individuals. This area has spawned the Posse Comitatus movement, the right-wing survivalist movement, and in the Pacific Northwest there are thousands of reactionary colonizers who seek to glom this land off for their own white ethno-state. Look up the Northwest Territorial Imperative if you don't believe me. In the past year, we have seen reactionaries from rural and semi-rural areas coming into the cities to sow chaos, engage in violence at Black Lives Matter and other progressive protests, and generally make trouble. In a Civil War situation, reactionaries who control the countryside will be able to cut highways and other transportation arteries, effectively starving the cities and placing them under a state of siege. Keep in mind, all food that you buy at the grocery store has to pass through the countryside on either a truck or a train. The processing centers for your beef, chicken, and pork are in the countryside. Many of these processing centers are manned by undocumented migrants and colonized workers. Many of them live in the nearby towns. These workers are natural friends of the revolutionary movement and should be organized by this movement. We're going to have to think about supply lines and logistics. If we are able to take and hold base areas in cities such as St. Louis, Chicago, Detroit, and Cleveland, how are we going to feed the people? A large amount of vacant space will have to be turned over to food production as a start. We should also take note of the fact that much of America's electricity infrastructure can be found in the countryside. A reactionary movement would naturally take advantage of this to plunge the cities into darkness. There is also the danger of reactionaries sneaking into cities to damage the water supply and other vital infrastructure. They caught some reactionaries in the 1980s who tried to poison, with cyanide, the entire water supply of the cities of Chicago and Memphis. Another factor in the makeup of the United States are the large indigenous reservations in the Dakotas and the Southwest. These rural areas should be paid special attention. The Navajo Nation controls 16 million acres of land in Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico. The Pine Ridge Sioux Reservation in South Dakota is 2.2 million acres. Oklahoma also has large amounts of tribal land. These are some of the poorest areas of the country, and there has been a history of armed struggles such as Wounded Knee and the Green Corn Rebellion. The masses of these reservations are natural friends of the revolutionary movement, and it is essential to integrate, recruit among, and organize them strategically. Now that we've talked about these conditions, let's talk about what happens when shit pops off. How will it pop off? Nobody knows, least of all me. Perhaps there will be a months-long uprising that is able to spread and avoid co-optation and rightfully throws reformist elements out on their ass, keeping revolutionary politics in command and also driving back the forces of reactionaries, the military, and the police. Maybe a left or right-wing armed movement seizes a base area and is successfully able to hold it. Most likely it will be a combination of these two, or elements of these two. However, what will not happen is a single group jumping up on a tank and going, "Here is revolution, comrade!" Revolutions don't happen that way, except in novels and the minds of foolish reactionaries. It will most likely be a slow burn that moves from step to step. An action here inspires an action there, that sort of thing. How long will this process take? Decades. The Chinese spent the years 1921 to 1949 making their revolution. The Filipinos have been fighting since '69, the Peruvians lasted roughly 15 years, the Indians have been fighting since 1967. What will happen afterwards? This I know for sure. America will not exist in its current form, a prison house of nations. It will be broken up. What will replace that territorially? I have no idea, and I have no place to speculate. The Hawaiians and Puerto Ricans will rightfully take advantage of the chaos on the mainland to kick out the U.S. and regain their independence. We also have to keep in mind that all of this land is stolen, conquered by blood and treachery. This is stolen indigenous land. There is not going to be some happy joining of hands of the proletariat. Life simply doesn't work that way. Wars sure as hell don't certainly work that way. There will be excesses. More likely than not, accounts will be settled with blood, particularly in the South where new African people and colonizers still, for the most part, mutually despise each other. The U.S. government will turn loose its drones and other weapons of mass destruction on cities populated by new African and Chicano people as a matter of course. You think they won't bomb L.A. or bomb Detroit? They already bombed Philly. These people do not value our lives. Infrastructure will be laid waste. Highways will be reduced to rubble. This country will strongly resemble Syria. Tens of millions of people will have lost their lives to violence, both revolutionary and reactionary, or to starvation. People in hospitals who rely on electricity to survive will probably die there. War is cruel to the sick and disabled. We also have to keep in mind that all this will not happen in a vacuum. Mexico will see the opportunity to possibly attempt to reconquer its land in the Southwest, and Chinese social imperialism, along with Russia, will see opportunities to flex and meddle as well, and make money. In short, it's going to be a mess. Like General William Tecumseh Sherman said, war is cruelty. There is no use trying to reform it. The crueler it is, the sooner it will be over. War is simply hell. The final war of the United States? No less so. I'm Black Redguard.